And Tom Nolan is a former policy advisor at the Department of Homeland Security in the Office of Civil Rights and Civil Liberties, and he joins us now from Boston. Tom Nolan, welcome. First of all, now that you've had time to process what happened in the Capitol last week, how do you feel as an American about what transpired? Not focusing on the security aspect for now, but just overall.
I think shame is my primary sentiment, and embarrassment, particularly as a former law enforcement officer. I was a police officer for 27 years, and to see the I would say, abominable response on the part of the U.S. Capitol Police to the protesters that morphed very quickly into rioters and insurrectionists. I think it was something that was a national embarrassment for us, a national embarrassment international embarrassment actually for law enforcement, and something that I've never seen in a career that goes back many decades.
And there's a lot of discussion now about that speech that Donald Trump delivered before the mob headed to the US Congress and his role in organising the rally. As a security expert, how do you feel about the tone of his speech, and do you think that amounted to an incitement?
Well, it was certainly incendiary. And I think there was no doubt that he sent the protesters, people assembled listening to him speak, to the Capitol with their marching orders to do what needed to be done. And they clearly understood the message that Trump was delivering, and I think mounted their assault on the Capitol complex and the buildings, and were met with a woefully inadequate response on the part of law enforcement. I think that law enforcement proved to be outmaneuvered, outmanned. They were not equipped to deal with what they confronted. Many of the officers who were there were not equipped with riot gear. It looked like a motley assemblage of unprepared police officers who are not loath to arrest people on the grounds of the Capitol and inside the Capitol building. But when we were met with what were obviously a group of largely white supremacists and Boogaloo Boys and the Proud Boys, I think that many in law enforcement there saw kindred spirits that wouldn't cause them any harm. Many of these, the rioters were wearing thin blue line patches. A couple of them were carrying Blue Lives Matter flags. So I think that what the police saw were people who shared their sentiment around law and order, and I think they were shocked and abruptly overcome by the resistance that they met on the part of the rioters.
Yeah, and I'll ask you a few more questions about security in a moment, but I just want to ask, and you may feel uncomfortable with this next question, but answer it if you like, because your specialty is security rather than politics. But how do you feel now, because we've had this breaking news in the last couple of hours that the House has voted to impeach the president. How important do you think that is in addressing what happened?
Well, it certainly sends a message, and I think it's a message that needed to be sent, that the Congress regained control of the democratic process in voting to impeach Trump for a second time. And I think that it sends the message to the public that the Congress is in control, and I think that's a message that is contrary to what people saw a week ago today in the U.S. Capitol. So I think it's a message that reassured the public, and I think gave some momentum to the inauguration that's coming up on the 20th. And I think we've had public reports of an increased level of National Guard presence. They're now up to an authorized strength of 20,000. They've got 15,000 National Guard troops mobilized. Many of them are armed, which is not the usual, as you can see in the picture here, that they are inside the Capitol complex. There are armed National Guard troops. It's for sure. And as of today, the United States Secret Service has taken over operational command of the entire inaugural process going forward. Usually they take over a day before. They've taken over a week before. So there will be, I'm expecting, we will see a significant law enforcement footprint on the ground during the day of the inauguration and the days leading up to it that ought to, it would be hoped, discourage those who would come to the inauguration, come to the Capitol, looking to do harm to the people who are lawfully assembled there for the purpose of inaugurating the next president.
And Tom, did you ever think that you would see these kind of images during a supposed peacetime in the US with the National Guard, so many from the National Guard inside the Congress to protect the building from Americans?
This is something that is without precedent in our recent history. But given the tenor of what has gone on in the political realm and with the public discourse, I think that unfortunately, and I'm someone who is firmly supportive of First Amendment protected activities, and I think that seeing this kind of presence, it's jarring, it's shocking, and even to someone in law enforcement, and to see the level of destruction that was wreaked on the Capitol building and the grounds itself a week ago, I think was something that will stay with many of us for a very long time to come. And it's an indelible mark on the history of the United States, and certainly a sorry state of affairs for law enforcement and its response to what happened a week ago.
And so how concerned are you about the potential for further violence over the coming week ahead of the inauguration and on Inauguration Day itself? And how confident are you of the ability of the security agencies who've mobilised so many resources already to handle whatever is coming?
I think that I share the concern that any commentator or observer of these kinds of law enforcement operations would have, that we should be concerned. We'd be naive not to be. We can see that there is activity going on social media. We may see a presence that's larger in the Capitol than we did a week ago. But I think and I believe firmly that law enforcement, having learned lessons over the past week, going back to Wednesday of last week, that law enforcement is and will be up to the task of meeting any kind of confrontation with appropriate force in order to ensure the peaceful transition of power. So I believe that law enforcement will see sufficient resources in terms of personnel and equipment deployed on the streets at the scene of the inauguration to be able to meet any threat that they encounter.
Yeah. With so many resources placed in Washington now, is there a concern, though, that other less notable targets, state capitol buildings and other state buildings, could be more vulnerable?
Officials have been assured by military administrators and military officials that the ability to protect, and this is to military presence and the National Guard specifically, that sufficient resources will remain available to state capitals throughout the United States. So the resources that are being devoted to and deployed to the Capitol will come from the immediate area of the district around Maryland and Virginia primarily. But for the rest of the states and capitals that have concerns about protesters potentially mounting and assembling at state capitals, we have been assured that there are sufficient resources. And certainly we have sufficient law enforcement, regular police and sheriffs and state police. We've got in the United States, we've got over 800,000 police officers in the United States, over 18,000 local police agencies. So I'm not concerned that we will leave any other area particularly vulnerable because of the level of resources that we are deploying to D.C. I think we'll be okay. And I expect that a week from now that this will be behind us and that we will see a successful law enforcement operation on Inauguration Day.
Mm. And Tom Nolan, you mentioned before the tenor of the recent politics leading to this situation. What's your assessment of the tone of politics that there's been over recent times? How has it become so bad?
There's a lot of anger. There's certainly a severe degree of disconnect between people who are aligned with this administration and who are supportive of this administration and those who are critical of it. I think we've seen a level of vitriol and a level of anger in the discourse that is without recent precedent. And I think I share the sentiment and the hope that going forward that we can put the past 4 years behind us in the rearview mirror, learn some lessons from from the level I watched the debate in the House of Representatives today over the impeachment proceedings, and I can see at least, I'm not suggesting that the tide is turning, but I can see at least that there is a glimmer of hope, that there are those who have supported this administration who are beginning to revisit that. And I think that we've seen that some law enforcement personnel even who might have been sympathetic to this administration and sympathetic to the protesters who they saw come to the Capitol last week. I think the sentiment on the part, and I hope sentiment on the part of the majority of law enforcement will see that that there are those who are out to harm them, who we would ordinarily think would be our supporters. I think a lot of the police on the ground last week thought that the people who were protesting at the Capitol were law enforcement supporters, and they learned otherwise to their own detriment, unfortunately.
You mentioned the last 4 years there. There are some who argue this is a product of a broken political system where there have been serious issues over time where people have lost trust. Going back decades, do you put the blame for what's happened most in the last week or so more squarely at the feet of Donald Trump rather than looking back further?
I think Donald Trump is a symptom of a society that has, I'd suggest, gone astray and has lost its vision. And I think that there is a strong component. We've seen the strength of the component of society who sees what many of them see as traditionally their heritage and their rights being eroded and being challenged. And I think the metaphor of the non-college educated white male and that kind of anger and grievance that those who fall into that category, I think that's what's caused kind of this erosion of public trust, if you want to characterize it as that, but certainly the disconnect between a significant level of disconnect between certain segments of the society that see their history and their heritage and what they see as their birthright being eroded.
Yeah, and so there's a lot of work to be done politically by hopefully excellent politicians to ensure that there is a big slab of the US population that isn't now ignored as a result of this as well?
And I think that many of us share the optimism. I was heartened to see on the floor of the House of Representatives today the many people who came together to not only denounce what happened last week at the Capitol, but also to denounce the administration, and even a trickle of Republican support. I think 10 Republican representatives voted to impeach Trump. So I think I share a sense of optimism that many progressives and I think people who are forward-looking and who have endured what we've endured over the last 4 years, I think we're optimistic that this new leadership in President Biden and the majority that we will have in the Senate, as well as the House of Representatives, will put us on the path to restore the dignity of our democracy.
Okay, Tom Nolan, really interesting having a chat to you. Thanks so much for talking to us from Boston.
Thank you.